Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of Uke TLC with me, Matt Stead. In today's video we're going to talk about string action. What is string action? The action of your string is how high your strings are from the top of the fretboard. That's going to affect a lot of things, including intonation, which is the tuning or the notes going sharp or flat as you play them. It will affect the tone, the volume and also the playability of your ukulele. Now there's a bit of a standard misconception out there that the best action for your ukulele is as low as physically possible without buzzing. And whilst that's true, if you're a beginner on ukulele, that's true for you because that's going to make your fretting much more comfortable, particularly when you're doing things like bar frets. But there are some disadvantages as well. When we lower the action on a ukulele, we're actually reducing the string tension ever so slightly. So you are going to feel a slight reduction in the volume and the tone. Also, if your strings are too low up this end, you're not going to have room to dig in if you're playing fingerstyle. And again, if your strings are really low this way, when you're really hitting your uke hard, if you're digging in when you're strumming, you're likely to get buzzing. So there's kind of advantages and disadvantages of both. We'll check out what works for me and what I think might work for you. We measure action in two main places. That's at the 12th fret and down here towards the nut, generally at the 1st fret. And when people say how high do you want your strings in terms of action, if they only give you one measurement, they're probably talking about the measurement at the 12th fret. And what we're talking about when we talk about the measurement at the 12th fret is the physical distance between the top of the 12th metal fret and the bottom of the string. That's really important because obviously if we're measuring we need to make sure that it's consistent. So we're going from the very top of the fret to the very bottom of the string and we measure it at the 12th metal fret. The most common way to make that measurement at the 12th fret is a string gauge. You can buy these on the internet, you can get them from luthier shops such as StewMac and lots of different suppliers. You can get plastic ones as well. I would recommend, if you're getting into this and you want to really set up your ukes accurately, to buy a metal rule or string gauge because they're going to be a bit more accurate. The plastic ones, because of the way they're cut, they can be a little bit higgledy-piggledy. And you place that gauge, as I say, on top of the 12th metal fret and you're measuring to the bottom of the string. This one has different measurements written out, so you can pass it along until it matches. You can just use the metal ruler option as well, where you'll sit down and count up. Of course, you could just use a normal ruler as well. Again, a metal one is best as we measure up from here. And we tend to make this measurement in millimeters. Now for me, this is the importance of a good setup on your ukulele. The string action is a personal thing, so some people like a higher action, some people lower. So when it comes from the factory, your uke will probably have been set up with a kind of average to a higher action. The reason they go for a slightly higher action is that it's easier to reduce the action than it is to heighten it. And we'll look at both in a short while. Ideally, your measurement at your 12th fret wants to be somewhere between 2.5 and 3 millimeters. Personally, I like to err towards a higher action because I play with long nails and I like to dig in. So I like to have my action at about 2.8 to 3 millimeters. If you find you want a bit more of a comfortable action and you find fretting can be a little bit uncomfortable, go towards the 2.5 millimeter end. Now you can go lower than that. Some people will take it right down to 2 millimeters, but as I say, you are going to sacrifice a little bit of tone and volume as you bring that action down. And you also have to be very, very careful not to run into buzzing on your ukulele, where the strings will vibrate and they'll be so low that they'll actually vibrate against the frets and it will cause a buzzing noise. At the nut end of things, I've got a neat little trick where you can kind of check your action. Really, it just wants to be just barely above that first metal fret. You almost want to see almost no daylight. I'm talking a percentage of a millimetre, perhaps around half a millimetre would work. The way I like to check it is I take some kind of credit card, or if you've got a library card or something like this. Embarrassingly, this is my Swindon Town season ticket. For my sins, I go and put myself through that torture every Saturday. And what you want to do is make sure you're using a credit card which doesn't have the embossed numbers, because that's going to make it thicker. But general, just an unembossed card. Just place it under the strings and let it fall naturally down between the strings and the frets. And ideally, for an ideal kind of action, you want it to be stopping roundabouts the first, second or third fret. If you drop that card and it goes all the way to the bottom, then your action this end is probably a little bit too high, and it's going to cause intonation issues, and it's going to make pressing the strings that little bit more difficult. So drop the card down. If it falls about here, you're good to go. If it was to stop around about here, really your string action is way too low. So roundabouts here is good. So what do we do if our action is too high or too low? Let's take one at a turn. Let's look at the most common issue, and that's that your action is a little bit too high. Now, I've taken the strings off this uke, I've readily prepared it. You can just slacken your strings off if you want to adjust the action and not have all the faff of having to put them on and off again, okay? And that's probably the easiest way to do it, because you are going to want to check the action as you go. If you take all the strings off, it's a bit more awkward. I've just done this to make it easier for demonstration purposes. Now, this part of your bridge called the saddle, this removable part, tends to be made out of a composite material, bone or plastic. It should just pull right out. Now, if it's stuck in there, you can use a pair of pliers to pull it out. I've even used scissors in the past, but be careful. Some pliers, if you really have to hold tight, you can actually mark the saddle, which can be not the best thing, obviously. And be really careful when removing it, because it's very, very easy to slip and scratch your ukulele. This is where rubber tip pliers can be really, really useful. You can pull those saddles out without damaging the bridge nice and gently. Once you've removed your saddle, you're going to do something really, really important, and I don't want you to skip this part if you are doing setups on your own ukulele. What you're going to do is you're going to take a marker. I'm using a permanent one, but you can use felt tip if you want something that rubs off nice and easily. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put some marks all the way along both sides of the saddle. They'll look like this. Notice you don't have to be super accurate, but try and make them roughly the same height. If one is longer, this isn't going to work. So I've done it both sides so you can see, and I've put some marks along the saddle. Now this is really important, because what we're going to do now is we're going to sand the underside of this saddle using sandpaper. Now, by having those lines there, as you pass the saddle over the sandpaper, you're going to be able to see if you're taking more off one side than the other. I'll talk about gripping this in a moment, but if you're not careful, what you can do is you can hold it at a slight angle and you can take a little bit more off one side than the other, but those lines are your guide. So if it's going down one side, push with a bit more force towards the other and you'll even it out. What I also like to do at this point is just put a little mark in the corner of one of the sides and remember which side I've put it in. Now that's important, because when you put the saddle back in your ukulele, you want to make sure it's the right way around. So by marking one of the sides, you can make sure you put it in the same way going back in as you took it out. If you're not sure and you've kind of already taken it out and got in a bit of a muddle, most saddles will be compensated, so where the C string falls, the C string, because it's the thickest string, the saddle will be compensated. It doesn't have to be a lot, but there'll be a slight curve where the C string sits, just to make the intonation correct. So if you've got it one way around or the other, just flip it so that that compensated part is under the C string and you'll be sure. But of course, if you mark it, you'll be absolutely fine putting it back in the right way. You want to use a relatively coarse set of sandpaper, something like 1 to 200 grit, so it's going to take a decent amount off the saddle at one time. You're going to hold your saddle within your fingers as so. Make sure you're not too close to the edge because you don't want to be sanding your nails and your fingers, you want to be sanding the saddle. The other important thing is to hold it dead centre or right in the middle of the saddle. If I'm at one end, I'm more likely to apply uneven pressure, and that's more likely to take more off one side than the other. And the other thing is, as you're sanding, try not to angle the saddle one way or another. If you do that by accident, you can easily compensate by taking a bit more off the other side, but try and keep it as level as possible. And what you're going to do is you're going to take the saddle and you're going to pass it over the sandpaper with fairly long, forceful strokes. And you'll be able to see from the white residue on the sandpaper how much you're taking off. Remembering to use those guides that you've already written on to just help you to see that you're taking off the same amount on each side. Now, as you can imagine, it can be really easy to get a bit too over enthusiastic and take loads off the bottom of the saddle too quickly. So what I would say is just go a little bit at a time, perhaps 5 to 10 strokes, just seeing how much residue comes out. And this is why keeping the strings on the ukulele slacking can be really useful, because what you want to do next is put the saddle back into the slot, making sure you've got it the right way around, and then just take those strings up to full tension, check the string action again, see whether it's gone down enough. If it hasn't, saddle out, we sand some more, saddle back in. And you want to do that in stages. It's quite laborious and sometimes it might take you like anything between 5 to 10 tries to make sure you've got it right. But it's a lot easier taking a little bit off at a time and checking than going too far and then having to shim the saddle. Now, what do you do if you have the opposite problem and your action is too low? Generally, low action will be diagnosed by buzzing. What's happening here is that when you fret certain strings, or sometimes even open, your string is close enough to the fret that it's vibrating in. It hits the fret and that creates buzz. And that can be one of the most frustrating problems as a ukulele player. Now, of course, you can buy saddles. All you want to do is make sure you measure the slot first, because they can come in different widths and thicknesses. Of course, they can be cut and sanded down as well, but that might be too big a job for you. So you could either talk to your supplier about sending a new saddle, or you could buy one on the internet, see whether it fits, and do a bit of sanding if it doesn't. Another option is to shim your saddle. That means to place a thin bit of material beneath the saddle within the slot. Now, this can be all sorts of different materials. Generally, the best material to use is wood, because we've got a wooden bridge and we've got a bone nut or saddle, and a little slice of wood, as long as it's not too soft, will still allow the vibrations to pass from that saddle into the bridge, which is going to be really important. So we'll take a very thin piece of wood, cut to fit, pop it into the slot, put your saddle back in, and that should raise the action. Just like with lowering, what you might have to do is take your shim, make it a little bit bigger, sand a little bit off as you go to get it to the correct height. If you can't use wood shims, sometimes you can use a little thin bit of plastic. I've known lots of manufacturers use something like this, which is actually a bit of tortoiseshell binding. Probably not as good in terms of tone production to use plastic, but sometimes needs must. Exactly the same process. This will go underneath here. And if you're absolutely desperate, and I have done this before when I haven't had anything else to hand and I'm on tour, you can take your card. Perhaps this season ticket would be good. We're not doing very well this season, Swindon, so this might be a good one to chop up. Take an old card that you don't use anymore and just snip a little bit off your credit card or bank card or library card, whatever it is, and you can use that as a shim as well. So What about the action this end with our nut? Now, on some ukuleles, the nut isn't glued in, and even if it is glued, if you're very careful, if you use a pointed bradawl and a hammer, you can just knock it out gently, and you can sand the underneath of that saddle very carefully, keeping it very level to just reduce the action slightly. Most people who work on ukuleles, include myself, prefer rather to be a little less invasive than that and use fret files. And what we do is we just file the nut slots down a little, and I'll show you how to do that just to lower the action this end. So I have specialist StewMac fret files which come in specific gauges so you can match the slots already cut in your ukulele. You can get cheaper options available on Amazon and other places online, but these are ideal. Just make sure your file isn't too wide for the slots. That's really, really crucial, because if you cut these slots too wide, your string is going to rattle from side to side in that slot and you're likely to get buzzing problems. Now again, I've taken off the strings off this ukulele just for demonstration purposes to keep things easier. But you can just remove your strings and place them to the side. You can tape them in place with painter's tape or low tack tape if that helps. It's useful to do that because what you want to do is you want to check your filing as you go. That's really, really important. Now the other thing, as you're filing, we want to angle this file slightly. So can you see here, I'm angling it as it goes down towards the headstock. We don't want it completely flat like this. And that's because we want a really sharp break angle at this side of the nut. That's really important. And that will increase the kind of pressure on the nut and make the volume and tone at its best. So this angle here coming downwards, not straight or that way, this angle going down. Now, of course, that means you have to be very careful not to dig into the headstock as you're filing. You could place a card over the top or you could completely tape it up. I like to just use an old credit card or an old string gauge like this. And I pass the file very, very gently forwards and backwards with that angle, a little bit at a time. Of course, be careful not to angle this way or this way. We want to be very straight as we go about doing this job. What I would do then, just blow the residue away, put the string back on, do your credit card test again, check the height and take a little bit off. And you want to go one step at a time, matching the gauge of all of these strings as we go. So what about one final problem then? What if your string action is too low this end? That means that you're getting buzzing in the first few frets when you press them down and pick or strum. Now that can be a common problem. I actually like to have my action relatively low this end and slightly higher this end, but again it's something you can dial in as a player to see which you prefer. But if you have a lot of buzzing this end, making sure that it's not technique, that your finger is close to the fret and not back here. A common cause of buzzing amongst players is fretting too far to the left and not going over to the right. But making sure that it is the ukulele that's a problem. If you're having a lot of buzzing this end when you chord, it will be probably because your nut slots are cut a bit too deep. Now this one is not an easy cure. This isn't something that I'm going to show you in a video, but there are videos on YouTube where you can look up to do this. The best bet is to get a mixture of baking soda and super glue. When you add powdered baking soda to super glue, it turns the super glue a kind of creamy white, which matches the colour of most nuts. So you mix them together, you take a cocktail stick or a very small applicator and you just put the solution within one of the gaps. Leave it until it's completely hardened and that will raise the gap. Now of course then you need to file it ever so slightly to kind of have a bit more of an accurate nut slot. But if your nut is too low, all is not lost, that is an option. And of course with all of this stuff, if you don't feel confident yourself, take it into a music shop, ukulele shop or music shop, or ask your luthier to take a look for you and they'll be able to help out. Well, I really hope that was useful, folks. Between this video and the last video, which was about leveling and polishing your frets, you should be able to give yourself a really lovely ukulele setup, making sure it's really comfortable to play without buzzes. Talking of buzzes, in a separate video I'm going to have a look at buzzing on ukuleles. Now this is a really common problem on many ukuleles and it can be fairly hard to diagnose. So rather than just tacking it on the end to this one, I'm going to have a full video on diagnosing buzzing on your ukulele and see if we can sort out what the problem is and see how to fix it. I'll see you there, everyone. Take care, everyone. Bye bye.